a titan of industry. A man who could buy and sell cities before breakfast, unleashed his fury on a young waitress over a simple cup of coffee. The entire restaurant held its breath, expecting her to crumble under the weight of his rage. But he made one critical mistake. He profoundly underestimated her. Her response wasn't just a comeback. It was a quiet, devastating revelation that would unravel his multi-billion-dollar empire and ignite a firestorm of public opinion. What did this unassuming young woman say that caused an entire restaurant of New York's elite to rise to their feet in applause? The answer will change how you see the battle between the powerful and the voiceless. The Gilded Compass wasn't just a restaurant. It was a theater of power on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Its patrons didn't come merely to eat. They came to be seen to negotiate, to dismantle and assemble empires over plates of seared scallops and glasses of vintage Bordeaux. The air itself seemed expensive, thick with the scent of money ambition, and a faint floral perfume that couldn't quite mask the predatory undertones. Into this arena, at precisely 12:30 p.m., strode Ethan Beaumont. He was not a man who walked, but one who occupied space. At 52, he was sculpted from granite and impatience, with a mane of silver-streaked dark hair swept back from a face that seemed permanently woven into a mask of discerning annoyance. His suit, a bespoke creation of charcoal grey, probably cost more than the yearly salary of anyone serving him. He didn't look at the maitre d'. He looked through him, his gaze already fixed on the best table in the house, the corner booth with a panoramic view of Central Park, a throne for a modern-day king. Mr. Beaumont. An honor, the maitre d', a man named Jeffrey, murmured, his professional smile stretched tight. Your table is ready. Ethan offered a curt nod, his attention already on his phone, his thumb swiping through market data with merciless speed. He moved with an aura of compressed energy, a lion pacing his gilded cage. Every waiter, every busboy, every chef in the kitchen knew who he was. Ethan Beaumont, the CEO of Beaumont, consolidated a sprawling conglomerate with tentacles in tech finance and logistics. He was a corporate raider, a titan, a man known in the Wall Street Journal as the Huntsman for his ruthless efficiency in tracking and acquiring vulnerable companies. He settled into the plush leather of the booth, placing his phone face down on the crisp white linen with a soft but definitive click. The gesture was a warning: I am granting you my momentary and very expensive attention. It was Olivia Ross's section. At 22, Olivia was the antithesis of everything the Gilded Compass represented. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to be invisible. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a starched white apron, was a cloak of professional anonymity. Her brown hair was pulled back into a neat, functional bun, and her face, though pretty, with large, expressive hazel eyes, was usually a mask of quiet concentration. She was a ghost who materialized with water disappeared with empty plates, and whose primary goal was to navigate the treacherous currents of the dining room without making a ripple. She had seen Ethan Beaumont before. He was a semi-regular, a storm cloud that appeared on the reservation list once or twice a month. The senior staff usually fought not to take his table. He was a notoriously poor tipper and an Olympic-level critic. Today, the rotation had fallen to her. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Olivia approached the table, her notepad in hand. Good afternoon, Mr. Beaumont. Can I get you something to start with? Water, perhaps a drink? He didn't look up. He merely waved a dismissive hand. Black coffee. And make it quick. I'm expecting a guest. Of course, sir, she said, her voice a soft murmur. She retreated to the service station, her heart thumping a little faster than usual. It was always like this with him. He had a way of making you feel small, insignificant, like a cog in a machine so vast you couldn't even comprehend it. She prepared the coffee herself, ensuring the cup was warmed, the brew fresh and dark, the aroma rich. She placed the cup saucer and a single silver spoon on her tray, and walked back her steps measured and silent. She placed the coffee on the table to his right. "Your coffee, Mr. Beaumont." He picked up his phone again, his attention already lost to the digital world. He didn't acknowledge her. Olivia lingered for a second, as was protocol, before turning to leave. She was halfway back to her station when she heard his voice, a low growl that cut through the restaurant's polite hum. "Waitress." She stopped, her back rigid. The word was not a request. It was a summons, like a master calling a dog. She turned around slowly, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "Yes, sir." Ethan Beaumont was staring at the coffee cup, a look of profound disgust on his features. He hadn't even tasted it. He slowly raised his icy blue eyes to meet hers, and in them Olivia saw a storm gathering. It was a cold, cruel storm, and she was standing right in its path. The murmur of the dining room, a carefully curated symphony of clinking cutlery and hushed conversations, began to falter. Patrons at nearby tables, experts in sensing shifts in the dynamics of power, subtly angled their bodies. Their senses peaked. A predator was stirring. Ethan Beaumont's gaze was a physical weight pinning Olivia to the spot. He gestured imperiously at the cup on the table, not with his hand, but with a slight contemptuous tilt of his chin. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. Olivia's mind raced. Was the cup chipped? Did she forget the sugar caddy, even though he never used it? "It's your black coffee, sir. From the French press brew you prefer." She remembered the detail from his last visit, a small piece of information she'd logged away in the hopes of providing seamless service. A humorless smile touched his lips, a fleeting, cruel thing. "You think I'm asking for a description of the beverage? I'm asking you what this insult is doing on my table." He still hadn't touched it. He reached out his long, manicured fingers, not lifting the cup, but placing a single fingertip on the side of the porcelain. He held it there for a moment, his expression theatrically grave. "It's cold," he declared. The statement hung in the air, an indictment, not just an observation, but a verdict on her competence, her worth. Olivia was bewildered. "Sir, I just poured it myself. The pot was brewed less than 2 minutes ago. I can assure you it's hot." It was the wrong thing to say. Challenging him, even with the politest of truths, was like throwing a match into a vat of gasoline. His eyes narrowed into slits of frozen fury. "Are you calling me a liar?" He snarled, his voice rising, shedding its soft menace for outright aggression. The last vestiges of conversation in their corner of the restaurant died completely. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Geoffrey, the maitre d', began a slow, hesitant advance from his station, his face pale. No, sir. Of course not." Olivia stammered, her professional composure beginning to crack. "I just meant, perhaps the cup cooled faster than usual. I can get you a fresh one immediately." "Faster than usual." He scoffed, his voice now loud enough to carry across the entire room. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished floor. He stood up, towering over her, a monument of tailored rage. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you think I have time in my day to debate the thermodynamic properties of your poorly made coffee with a girl who likely couldn't even balance her own checkbook. His words were verbal blows, each one designed to humiliate. Olivia felt her face flush with heat. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, some sympathetic, some morbidly curious. "I'm just trying to fix the problem, sir," she said, her own voice trembling slightly, but still holding a thread of professionalism. The problem Ethan boomed now, playing to the captivated audience, is a fundamental lack of competence. It's the disease of mediocrity that is rotting society from the inside out. People who don't care. People who don't strive. People who think good enough is an acceptable standard. He pointed a finger at her, the tip jabbing the air inches from her face. "You are the problem. You and your minimum wage effort. You bring me this lukewarm swill, and you expect me to just accept it, to pay a premium for this pathetic excuse for service. Sir." "Please lower your voice," she pleaded, her eyes darting around at the sea of faces. This was a nightmare. Her plea only enraged him further. It was a confirmation of his power, of her weakness. "Oh, so now you're telling me what to do?" He let out a short, barking laugh. Unbelievable. Then he did something that tipped the scene from a verbal dressing down into a physical act of degradation. With a flick of his wrist, he backhanded the coffee cup. It wasn't a violent strike, but it was deliberate, precise, and utterly contemptuous. The cup flew off the saucer, spinning through the air. Dark, hot coffee splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, and worse across the front of Olivia's clean white apron, leaving a shocking, ugly brown stain. The porcelain hit the marble floor with a sickening crack, shattering into a dozen pieces. A collective gasp swept through the gilded compass. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, heavy and profound. Every person in the room was frozen, staring at the scene, the furious billionaire standing over the shattered cup, the spreading brown stain on the floor and on the waitress's apron, and the young woman herself standing perfectly still in the center of the wreckage he had created. Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't cry out. She simply stared down at the mess on the floor, then at the dark stain blooming across her chest. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear, the anxiety, the desperate need to remain invisible, it all burned away, cauterized by the sheer, naked injustice of the act. The heat of the spilled coffee on her skin was nothing compared to the white-hot rage that began to smolder deep within her soul. He had crossed a line, and he had no idea who he had just crossed it with. For a long moment, the world seemed to slow down. Olivia's senses became preternaturally sharp. She could hear the faint, panicked breathing of the busboy, hiding behind a service pillar. She could smell the acidic tang of the spilled coffee, mingling with the cloying scent of lilies from the restaurant's grand centerpiece. She could feel the lingering heat of the splash on her skin, a phantom sensation that was already being replaced by a chilling calm. Her training, her instinct, the ingrained habit of a service worker, screamed at her. Apologize. Clean it up. Diffuse. Make the problem go away. That was the job. To absorb the anger of the wealthy and powerful, to be the silent, smiling buffer that made their world run smoothly. But as she looked at the shattered pieces of porcelain on the floor, she didn't just see a broken cup. She saw her father. She saw him at their kitchen table just last night, his face etched with a weariness that seemed to have settled deep into his bones. Robert Rossi, a man with a mind like a diamond, and a heart so soft it was a liability in the modern world. For 20 years he had poured his life, his savings, and his soul into his small tech firm, Rossi Innovations. He wasn't a businessman. He was an inventor, a creator. Her mind flashed to the project that had consumed him for the past 3 years. A revolutionary piece of software, a predictive algorithm for early-onset neurological disorders. It was brilliant, a potential lifesaver for thousands. Her father, in a fit of poetic inspiration, after nursing his own mother through a long illness, had codenamed it Project Nightingale. For the last 6 months, a shadow had loomed over Rossi Innovations, a hostile takeover bid from a massive, soulless conglomerate, a corporate giant that wanted to acquire Project Nightingale, not to save lives but to strip it for its patents, package it, and sell it to insurance companies for a monstrous profit, effectively pricing it out of reach for the very people it was designed to help. The name of that conglomerate was Beaumont Consolidated, and the man standing before her, his face contorted in a mask of arrogant fury. Over a cup of coffee was its CEO, Ethan Beaumont, the huntsman. Olivia had known who he was the moment he walked in. She'd read the articles, seen his picture in the financial news her father now obsessed over. She'd felt a cold dread seeing his name on the reservation list, but had dismissed it as a horrible coincidence. Now standing here publicly humiliated by the very man who was methodically trying to dismantle her father's life's work, it felt like a cruel joke orchestrated by the universe. All the stress of the past few months coalesced into a single, sharp point of clarity. The hushed, panicked phone calls her father thought she couldn't hear. The second mortgage on their family home. The reason she was working double shifts at the Gilded Compass instead of focusing on her final year of her software engineering degree at Columbia, a degree she was pursuing to one day work alongside her dad. It was all because of him. This man wasn't just yelling at a waitress. He was in his own oblivious, monstrous way yelling at the daughter of the man he was trying to ruin. He was kicking her family when they were already down, and he was doing it for sport. The fear that had paralyzed her moments ago transformed. It recrystallized into something hard, dense, and unyielding. It became resolve. He thinks I'm nobody. She thought, a cold fury rising within her. He thinks I'm just a part of the scenery. A faceless, nameless girl in an apron. She lifted her head slowly. Her gaze was no longer that of a startled, frightened waitress. The hazel of her eyes seemed to darken, to harden. The tremor in her hands stilled. She met Ethan Beaumont's glare, not with fear or submission, but with an unnerving, profound stillness that seemed to disconcert him more than tears or apologies ever could. Geoffrey, the maitre d', had finally arrived at the edge of the disaster zone. "Mr. Beaumont, please. I am so terribly sorry. Let us move you to another table. Of course, your entire meal will be on the house." He shot a frantic, pleading look at Olivia, a silent order to stand down, to disappear. But Olivia didn't move. She didn't even acknowledge Geoffrey. Her entire focus was on Ethan Beaumont. He was still breathing heavily, high on his own adrenaline and righteous indignation. He expected her to scurry away, tail between her legs. She took one small, deliberate step forward, her shoes crunching almost imperceptibly on a shard of the broken cup. The sound was quiet, yet in the tomb-like silence of the restaurant, it was as loud as a gunshot. She was going to respond. It wouldn't be a yell. It wouldn't be an insult. It would be something far more damaging. She was going to take away his power by showing him that she was not nameless. She was not invisible, and she knew exactly who he was. The storm inside her had gathered, and it was about to break. The air in the gilded compass was so thick with tension, it felt like a physical substance. Every diner, every staff member was a statue in a tableau of suspended time. They were all watching the young waitress who, against all expectation, had not crumpled. She had solidified. Ethan Beaumont, momentarily thrown off by her lack of a cowering response, narrowed his eyes. "What is it? Do you have something to say? Or are you just going to stand there looking stupid?" Olivia ignored the fresh insult. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, but her voice, when it came, was the calm at the center of the storm. It was low, clear, and carried a chilling precision that cut through the silence far more effectively than a shout. "It must be exhausting," she began. Ethan blinked. The response was so unexpected, it short-circuited his rage. "What did you just say to me?" "I said it must be exhausting." Olivia repeated, her gaze unwavering. She took another small step forward, closing the distance between them. She was no longer just a waitress. She was an equal on this battlefield. Maintaining such a high level of vigilance, the constant due diligence required to ensure every single thing in your life meets your exacting standards. The coffee's temperature, the thread count of the linens, the quarterly earnings reports, the hostile takeover price of a small family-run innovation company. A flicker of confusion, then alarm, crossed Ethan's face. The reference was oblique, but it was surgical. "I imagine," she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, "that when you're trying to execute a leveraged buyout, details are everything. You can't afford a single miscalculation, a single variable left unaccounted for. It can ruin the entire venture." The blood began to drain from Ethan Beaumont's face. The blustering theatrical anger was vanishing, replaced by a stark, cold shock. Who was this girl? How could she possibly know this terminology? "You're right to be upset about the coffee," Olivia said, and now there was a definite edge of ice in her tone. "It's a distraction, an unexpected variable. Much like a founder who refuses to sell who values his integrity more than your offer. That can make a meticulously planned project messy." The silence in the restaurant was now charged with a new energy intrigue. This was no longer a simple confrontation. It was something else entirely. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, his mind scrambling to process the impossible. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted with dizzying speed. Olivia pressed her advantage, her words like carefully placed keystones, locking a new reality into place. "You're waiting for Mr. Peterson from the Harding Payne Investment Group, aren't you?" she asked, naming the very man he was there to meet, the final piece of financing he needed, to secure the final funding tranche. "You have to project an image of absolute control, unassailable power, and a waitress bringing you cold coffee, though. That makes you look weak. It undermines the entire performance." She leaned in ever so slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more resonant than her previous tones. "Especially when the success of Project Nightingale hangs in the balance." The name landed in the silent room like a detonation. Ethan Beaumont recoiled as if she had physically struck him. Project Nightingale, the internal, highly confidential code name for his acquisition of Rossi Innovations. It was known only to his inner circle, his lawyers and the key investors. It was not a name a waitress in a restaurant should know. It was impossible. His face, moments ago red with rage, was now ashen. The mask of the Titan had shattered, and behind it was a man exposed and vulnerable. Who are you?" He finally managed to stammer, his voice a hoarse whisper. Olivia stood up straight, a quiet dignity settling over her like a cloak. The stain on her apron no longer looked like a mark of shame, but a battle scar. She held his stunned, panicked gaze and delivered the final devastating blow. "My name is Olivia Rossi," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing with the truth of her identity. "Robert Rossi is my father." A wave of audible gasps rippled through the restaurant. The context of the entire scene snapped into focus for everyone watching. This wasn't a billionaire yelling at a random server. This was a corporate predator in the midst of trying to destroy a man's life's work, unknowingly confronting that man's daughter and treating her like dirt. The sheer poetic cruelty of it hung in the air, awful and undeniable. And in that moment, a woman at a nearby table, a smartly dressed executive in her 60s, began to clap. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was a slow, deliberate, and respectful applause. Then the man beside her joined in. Across the room, another table followed suit. Within seconds, a wave of applause was swelling, growing, and filling the entire restaurant. It wasn't for a spectacle. It was for courage. It was for the underdog. It was a resounding communal verdict on the scene they had all just witnessed. Ethan Beaumont stood frozen, his empire and his ego crumbling around him, defeated not by a market crash or a rival CEO, but by a 22-year-old waitress and a cold cup of coffee. To understand the depth of the applause, to truly grasp the seismic shock of Olivia's revelation, one had to understand the story of Robert Rossi. It was a story known only to a few, but it was the silent, invisible narrative that underpinned the entire drama in the Gilded Compass. Robert Rossi was not a product of Wall Street or Silicon Valley's venture capital culture. He was the son of a mechanic from Queens, a boy who learned to see the world not as it was, but as a series of fascinating systems that could be taken apart, understood, and put back together in a better way. He had a gentle soul and a mind that moved with the quiet, intricate precision of a Swiss watch. He won a scholarship to MIT, where he excelled not through aggressive ambition, but through a pure, unadulterated love for solving problems. After graduating, he didn't chase the high-paying jobs at massive tech corporations. Instead, he returned to New York and, working out of his garage, founded Rossi Innovations, with a small inheritance and a powerful dream. For years, the company was a small boutique firm that created brilliant but unglamorous software solutions for logistical and engineering challenges. Robert was the architect of elegant code, the kind of creator who found beauty in efficiency and function. The turn came 5 years ago, when his own mother, Eleanor, was diagnosed with a rapidly progressing form of Parkinson's disease. The diagnosis came too late for any meaningful intervention. Robert, heartbroken, watched the vibrant woman who had raised him slowly fade her mind, trapped in a body that would no longer obey her commands. During those painful years, he channeled his grief into a new purpose. He became obsessed with early detection. He spent countless nights reading medical journals, consulting with neurologists, and teaching himself the fundamentals of bioinformatics. He saw a pattern, a ghost in the machine, subtle, almost imperceptible tremors and vocal modulations that preceded a formal diagnosis by years. He believed he could create an algorithm to detect them. This was the birth of Project Nightingale. Using machine learning and advanced vocal pattern analysis, he and his small team developed a software that could analyze a short recorded sample of a person's speech and detect the telltale neuromuscular signatures of incipient degenerative diseases with astonishing accuracy. It was revolutionary. It wasn't a cure, but it was the next best thing, a chance a chance for early treatment for planning for a better quality of life. He named it Nightingale, after Florence Nightingale, the pioneer of modern nursing, a beacon of hope in the dark. He secured patents and began the slow, arduous process of seeking FDA approval funding, the research with every penny the company made. He turned down multiple buyout offers from large pharmaceutical companies, fearing they would bury the tech or twist its purpose. He wanted it to be accessible, affordable, a tool for doctors in community clinics, not just specialists in wealthy hospitals. This principled stand made him vulnerable. He was running out of money. And that was when the scent of blood reached the nostrils of Ethan Beaumont. Ethan Beaumont's story was the dark reflection of Robert Rossi's. He too came from humble beginnings. But where Robert saw systems to be improved, Ethan saw systems to be exploited. He clawed his way to the top with a terrifying single-mindedness, believing that wealth was the only true armor against the world's indifference. He didn't create. He conquered. Beaumont consolidated. Specialized in identifying companies like Rossi Innovations, small, brilliant, innovative, and financially overextended. His method was brutal and effective. He would initiate a hostile takeover bid, offering a price just high enough to tempt some shareholders, but low enough to be an insult. Then his legal and financial teams would descend like wolves, burying the target in paperwork, threatening lawsuits and bleeding them dry until they had no choice but to surrender. When his analysts brought Project Nightingale to his attention, he didn't see a beacon of hope. He saw a grossly undervalued asset. He saw an algorithm that, once acquired, could be sold to insurance corporations. They would use it as a screening tool to identify high-risk individuals and drastically increase their premiums or deny them coverage altogether. The profit potential was astronomical. Robert Rossi's humanitarian dream was Ethan Beaumont's billion-dollar opportunity. The past 6 months had been a war of attrition. Beaumont's lawyers had inundated Robert with legal challenges, questioning the validity of his patents. Beaumont's agents had approached his key employees, offering them lucrative jobs to abandon ship. Robert had been fighting back with everything he had, working himself to the point of collapse, his idealism being ground down by the relentless machinery of corporate warfare. This was the war Olivia had been watching from the sidelines. This was the stress that had haunted her family's dinner table. And now, the general of the opposing army stood before her, stripped of his power, exposed in a room full of the very people whose respect he craved. She hadn't just revealed her name. She had revealed him. She had held up a mirror, and in it the entire restaurant could see him for what he was, not a titan, but a bully, not a huntsman, but a vulture circling a man who was trying to do some good in the world. Her reply wasn't just a comeback, it was a judgment, and the applause thundering through the gilded compass was its unanimous affirmation. The applause began not as a thunderclap, but as a single deliberate sound. It came from a woman seated 2 tables away. Judge Annalise Keller, a retired federal appellate judge, renowned for her sharp intellect and even sharper tongue. Her clap was not enthusiastic. It was punctuating. Each impact of her palms was a gavel strike, delivering a verdict on the proceedings. Her face, framed by elegant silver hair, was impassive, but her eyes, fixed on Ethan Beaumont, held a profound and chilling disapproval. She was not merely applauding a waitress. She was condemning a tyrant in the court of public opinion. A man at her table, a prominent surgeon, joined her, his applause equally measured. Then across the room, the sound began to swell. Jonathan Pierce, a venture capitalist, whose firm EOS Ventures was famous for backing ethical tech and sustainable projects, began clapping with vigor. He leaned towards his lunch companion, his voice a low, intense murmur that was just audible over the growing noise. I knew it. Beaumont tried to get us in on a hostile bid last year. I felt dirty just sitting in the room with him. This is who he really is. He looked at Olivia with unadorned admiration, seeing in her the courage he wished more founders possessed. The applause became a contagion of conscience. A table of young software developers, dressed in expensive hoodies that were their own form of anti-suit uniform, broke into whoops and cheers. For them, this was personal. They saw in Robert Rossi a kindred spirit, an innovator being crushed by the very corporate monoliths they despised. They saw Olivia as their champion, their spokesperson. One of them cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Go Rossi!" A cry of solidarity that broke the dam of polite restaurant decorum. The sound became a living entity, a wave of affirmation that washed over Olivia and crashed against Ethan Beaumont. He flinched physically, recoiling from the noise as if it were a physical assault. His face, which had been a mask of shock, now twisted into a snarl of baffled fury. How could this be happening? These were his people. This was his world. They were supposed to fear him, to envy him, to emulate him. Instead, they were applauding his humiliation at the hands of a nobody. He scanned the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face, but found only a sea of judgment. Even those not clapping the ones who did business with him or feared his influence were staring at their plates, refusing to meet his gaze, their silence a damning vote of abstention. Geoffrey, the maitre d', had been frozen in place, his professional instincts warring with his human decency. For years he had operated on a simple principle. The customer, especially the million-dollar customer, is always right. His job was to smooth, to placate, to apologize. But as he watched Olivia stand her ground, her quiet dignity, a stark contrast to Beaumont's brutish rage, something within him snapped. He was tired of protecting monsters. With a newfound resolve, he took 3 deliberate steps and came to stand not behind Ethan, but at Olivia's side. It was a small movement, but in the geography of the dining room, it was a continental shift. He was no longer a neutral party. He had chosen his side. His presence next to her was a silent, unshakable bulwark. It was into this charged atmosphere that Arthur Peterson walked. His entrance went largely unnoticed at first, as all eyes were on the central drama. But Peterson, the 70-year-old chairman of the Harding Payne Investment Group, moved with a gravity that drew attention. He was cut from a different cloth than Beaumont, where Ethan's power was loud, brittle, and demanding of attention. Peterson's was quiet, deep, and confident. He didn't need to raise his voice. When he spoke, people simply listened. He had entered the restaurant a few minutes prior, and seeing the commotion had instructed the host he would wait. He had stood near the bar, observing the final act of the confrontation, his expression unreadable. Now he moved. He walked through the parting sea of tables, his gait unhurried, his gaze fixed. The applause began to taper off, replaced by a new, intense curiosity. Who was this man? What was his role in this play? Ethan Beaumont's head snapped up as he saw Peterson approaching. A desperate, panicked hope flickered in his eyes. Arthur. The final piece of his puzzle. His financial salvation. Arthur Ethan's voice was strained, attempting a bonhomie that sounded grotesque in the circumstances. Thank God. You're here. You will not believe the scene this unhinged girl has just made. It's been a complete nightmare. Arthur Peterson did not slow down. He walked directly past Ethan, his eyes not even granting him a flicker of recognition, as if dismissing a piece of poorly placed furniture. He stopped directly in front of Olivia and Geoffrey. The last few claps died out, leaving a silence that was more profound than the noise it replaced. Peterson looked at Olivia, his gaze searching and direct, but not unkind. "Miss Rosie, I presume?" he asked, his voice a calm, deep baritone. Olivia, overwhelmed, could only nod her hand, clutching her apron. "My name is Arthur Peterson," he said, his eyes now flicking for a brief, cold moment to Ethan. "I was scheduled to have a meeting with Mr. Beaumont today, a meeting of considerable financial importance to him." Ethan stepped forward, trying to insert himself back into the conversation, his desperation making him clumsy. "Arthur, listen. This is all a misunderstanding. A preposterous lie. This girl is the daughter of a business rival, trying to sabotage our deal with some theatrical performance." Peterson turned his head slowly to face Ethan. The quiet disappointment in his eyes was more devastating than any rage. "Was she lying about her name, Ethan?" he asked quietly. "Well, no. But was she lying about her father being Robert Rossi? That's not the point. Was she lying about Project Nightingale?" Peterson's voice was now edged with steel. "A project you assured me was a simple acquisition of undervalued intellectual property. You failed to mention you were attempting to wrest it from an unwilling founder in what amounts to a corporate siege." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I have been an investor for 40 years, Ethan. I have seen charlatans, geniuses, fools, and visionaries. The single most important metric I have learned to trust above all others is character. It is the bedrock upon which all successful ventures are built." He gestured vaguely towards the stained tablecloth and the shattered cup. "A man who unleashes such venom, such theatrical cruelty upon a young woman over a trivial matter like the temperature of his coffee does not possess character. He possesses a dangerously fragile ego. A man who cannot control his temper in a restaurant cannot be trusted to navigate the complexities of a 9-figure investment. Your judgment is compromised, Ethan. It's compromised by your arrogance." Turning his back on the now speechless Beaumont, Peterson focused again on Olivia. The warmth returned to his eyes. He reached into the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and produced a handsome cream-colored business card with a simple embossed logo. He offered it to her. "Please," he said, his voice gentle. "Give this to your father. Tell him Arthur Peterson has no interest in financing corporate bullies, but I have a very deep interest in supporting brilliant architects. Tell him I've read about his work, and I would be honored to meet with him at his earliest convenience. Perhaps Harding Payne can provide the capital he needs to see Project Nightingale through. The right way." Olivia's hand, smudged with a faint bit of coffee from the splash, trembled as she reached out to take the card. It felt impossibly heavy, a tangible object representing an impossible hope. She stared at the name Arthur Peterson, Chairman, Harding Payne, and a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. It was the culmination of months of fear of her father's silent suffering, of her own sense of powerlessness. She looked up at Peterson, tears finally blurring her vision. "Thank you." She whispered the words, choked with a gratitude so immense it could barely be contained in the 2 simple syllables. "Sir, thank you." Ethan Beaumont stood alone, a ghost at the feast. The deal was dead. His reputation was in tatters. His public execution was complete. He looked around the room at the faces of his peers and saw not a hint of sympathy. He saw only disgust, pity, and a certain grim satisfaction. The king was naked, his power revealed to be nothing more than a costume. Without another word, he turned. It was not the proud stride of a titan, but the hurried, hunched shuffle of a defeated man. His shoulders were slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. He bumped into a service trolley, scattering silverware with a clatter that sounded like mocking laughter. He didn't stop. He pushed through the heavy glass doors, held open by a doorman whose normally deferential expression was now one of cold neutrality, and vanished into the anonymity of the New York City sidewalk. The restaurant exhaled. The tension that had held them all captive dissipated, replaced by a warm, quiet buzz. Geoffrey rested a hand on Olivia's arm, his touch firm and grounding. "Olivia," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him. "In 20 years on this floor, I have never been prouder of a member of my staff. Go. Take the rest of the day. Take the rest of the week if you need it. Go be with your family." She nodded, clutching the business card, as if it were the most valuable thing she had ever held. Her impossible victory, witnessed and validated by an entire room, was complete. The moment the heavy glass doors of the Gilded Compass swung shut behind Ethan Beaumont, it was as if a spell of collective paralysis was broken. The dining room, which had been a silent theater, erupted into a low, buzzing murmur. Olivia stood, blinking in the center of it all, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a shaky, surreal emptiness in its wake. Arthur Peterson's business card was a solid, tangible anchor in her trembling hand. Before she could fully process what had happened, Judge Annalise Keller rose from her table and approached her. The judge's face, which had been stern and assessing, had softened into something resembling warm approval. "Miss Rosie," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of a courtroom. "In my career, I've seen many people confront bullies. Most do it with lawyers and motions. You did it with truth and dignity. Don't let anyone ever tell you that isn't the most powerful weapon of all." She gave Olivia's arm a brief, firm squeeze before returning to her table. A moment later, Jonathan Pierce from EOS Ventures was there, handing her his own card. "I meant what my friend yelled," he said with a wry smile. "Go, Rossi. Peterson is a good man. He'll do right by your father. But if for any reason you need a second opinion or a more aggressive partner to keep the wolves at bay, you call me. The world needs what your family is building." Her own colleagues warmed her. Maria, another waitress, who had often covered her breaks, threw her arms around her. "Liv, oh my God! I thought he was going to actually hit you. You were amazing." The young busboy, who had hidden behind the pillar, emerged, his eyes wide with awe, and simply handed her a glass of water, an offering of silent, profound respect. Geoffrey, the maitre d', stood by like a proud sentinel. He cleared his throat. "Olivia," he said, his voice imbued with a newfound gravitas, "the offers I made earlier stand. Take all the time you need. Your job will be waiting. But I suspect you won't be needing it anymore." He was right. Olivia's journey from the opulent grandeur of the Upper East Side to her father's small lab in a semi-industrial corner of Brooklyn was a disorienting trip between two planets. On the subway, surrounded by the everyday rush of the city, she felt invisible again, but in a different way. She wasn't a faceless server. She was a woman harboring an incredible, life-altering secret. She clutched the 2 business cards in her pocket, pulling them out several times, just to read the embossed names, reassuring herself that it had all been real. The confrontation replayed in her mind, in a dizzying loop. Beaumont's spittle-flecked rage, the shattering porcelain. The dead silence, the chillingly calm sound of her own voice, speaking words she didn't know she had in her, and the final glorious, impossible wave of applause. Meanwhile, the digital storm had already broken. The food blogger, a woman who went by the online handle NYC Eats, posted her 45-second video clip. The quality was shaky, filmed from behind a water glass, but the audio was brutally clear. She titled it, "More Than Just Bad Service at the Gilded Compass," witnessed a titan of industry get his just desserts. Within an hour, it had 1,000 retweets. By evening, it was at 50,000. The hashtag #BeaumontsBrew exploded. It was a perfect viral cocktail, a villain of obscene wealth and arrogance, a sympathetic and courageous heroine, and a moment of pure, unscripted justice. Memes appeared Ethan's furious face next to a cup of coffee with the caption, "My empire for a hot coffee." Olivia's calm face was captioned, "Serves justice hot or cold." People shared their own stories of abusive bosses and entitled customers, turning the hashtag into a global catharsis for service workers. For Ethan Beaumont, the ride back to his penthouse was a descent into hell. His phone began vibrating incessantly, not with market alerts, but with frantic calls from his PR chief, his COO, and his lead counsel. "Ethan, what the hell happened? A video is going viral." Harding Payne just issued a press release. They've pulled out of the Rossi deal, citing a fundamental misalignment of leadership values. The board is invoking the character and public disrepute clause in your contract. They've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. He watched his company's stock ticker on his phone, a line that was usually a source of immense pride, turn into a plummeting red cliff. He had built his empire on an image of ruthless control. In 5 minutes, a waitress had exposed it as the hollow shell it was. He wasn't a predator. He was a bully. And the world he was discovering with nauseating speed had no tolerance for a bully who got caught. When Olivia finally arrived at the unassuming brick building that housed Rossi Innovations, the contrast was jarring. The air here didn't smell of perfume and money, but of solder ozone and her father's burnt coffee. She found him where she knew she would be in the main lab, surrounded by whiteboards covered in the elegant, terrifyingly complex mathematics that was the language of his soul. He looked smaller than she remembered, worn down by a war he was silently losing. "Liv," he said, looking up from a monitor. His face was pale, the skin under his eyes bruised with exhaustion. "What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" She couldn't form the words right away. Instead, she walked over, took the lukewarm mug of coffee from his desk, and set it aside. Then she pulled up a stool, took his calloused hands in hers, and looked him directly in the eye. "Dad, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she began. Her voice was steady, infused with the confidence she had discovered just hours before. The fight with Beaumont, Consolidated, is over. Robert's face clouded with confusion and dread. "What do you mean? Did they succeed? Did they push us out?" "No," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. I think we pushed him out." She then told him everything. She left nothing out. The arrogant demand, the public tirade, the deliberately spilled coffee, the ugly stain on her apron. She watched her father's face shift from confusion to horror, then to a protective fury. He started to stand up, his fists clenched. "He did what to you? I'll kill him, Dad." "Wait," she said, holding his hands tighter. "Let me finish." She told him about the silence, about the moment of clarity, and about her reply. As she repeated her words, her father's anger slowly subsided, replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. When she got to the part where she revealed her name, Robert's jaw dropped, and when she uttered the words, "Project Nightingale," he simply stared at her. His mind, for once, unable to process the data it was receiving. She described the applause, the arrival of Arthur Peterson, the public denunciation of Ethan, and finally, she placed the 2 business cards on the cluttered workbench next to a disassembled circuit board. For a long moment, Robert Rossi said nothing. He stared at the cards, then at his daughter's face, seeing her not as the child he needed to protect, but as the incredible young woman who had just saved him. The weight of months of relentless stress, of sleepless nights, and gnawing fear finally broke. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, and his shoulders began to shake with silent, racking sobs. They were not tears of sadness, but of a relief so profound it was painful, a release of pressure so immense it felt like his very soul was unclenching. The meeting with Arthur Peterson took place 2 days later, not in a sterile boardroom, but in Robert's lab. Peterson arrived alone in a simple suit and spent the first hour not talking about finances, but asking Robert to explain the science. He listened with genuine fascination as Robert, animated and passionate for the first time in months, walked him through the algorithms on the whiteboard. Olivia sat with them no longer, just a daughter, but a key stakeholder. Her presence, a silent testament to the character Peterson valued so highly. By the end of the meeting, they hadn't just secured funding. They had forged an alliance built on mutual respect and a shared vision. The following week, the official offer for Olivia's full scholarship arrived from Judge Keller's Family Foundation. Arthur Peterson's formal internship offer followed with a clearly defined track to a leadership role at the newly capitalized and secure Rossi Innovations. She was on her way to becoming an architect herself. One evening, weeks later, Olivia stood with her father on the small rooftop of his building, looking out over the twinkling lights of Brooklyn. The hostile takeover was a memory. Project Nightingale was fully funded and on an accelerated path to changing lives. Ethan Beaumont had been forced to take an indefinite leave of absence from his own company. "You know," Robert said, breaking the comfortable silence, "for months I was so afraid that my fight, my obsession was costing you your future." He looked at her, his eyes shining with a pride that was brighter than the city skyline. "I never imagined that you, with your courage, would be the one to secure ours." Olivia smiled, thinking back to the fury, the fear, and the applause. She had walked into the gilded compass that day, as a waitress, invisible and disposable in the eyes of men like Ethan Beaumont. She had walked out as the architect of her own and her family's new beginning. Olivia Rossi's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured in bank accounts or boardrooms, but in the courage to speak truth to power, even when your voice trembles. It shows that beneath the surface of our everyday lives, behind the faces of the people who serve us, there are entire worlds of struggle, love, and incredible resilience. One person's act of defiance, rooted in integrity, can create ripples that change everything. We all face our own giants, our own moments where we can either stay silent or stand for what is right. If her bravery moved you, please give this video a like to spread this message of courage. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about the hidden heroes who walk among us. What would you have done in her place? Let us know in the comments below.